It's Valentine's Day. Do you have a date this year? Don't just go out with anybody, because February 14th, Valentine's Day can be pretty dangerous. Stalkers, ex-lovers, creepy bus drivers, grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and let's hear 5 Valentine's Day horror stories. Sweet dreams. Valentine's Day cards. I posted this once before, but didn't do the spacing correctly, so it was removed. I also found the cards, so now I can include pictures. This is something that I just can't figure out. I'm not really sure what to think about it. Maybe you guys have an opinion. I am a 19-year-old female. When I was 8, right around Valentine's Day, I received one of those small manila envelopes in the mail. It had no return address, but it was sent from another state that I didn't know anyone from. When I opened it, it was simply a folded sheet of computer paper with a picture of Linus from Charlie Brown, holding a heart and his blanket. It appeared to be drawn and colored by hand. On the inside was a short Valentine's Day message with a small personal detail about my life that only someone really close to me would know. Naturally, I thought it was probably my grandparents or my parents trying to do something nice for me. Every year, I received one of these cards around Valentine's Day. Every year it had a picture of Linus, including a detail of my life, was typed in the same font, and was from a different state. An example would be the Valentine's Day after I adopted my dog Bailey. The card said, "Would Bailey be jealous if you were my Valentine?" or something like that. I kept most of these, and managed to find a few as I was rummaging through my old worthless junk. When I got older, I finally mentioned it to my grandparents, fully expecting it to be them, but they swore that they weren't sending them. I honestly believed it, because I had expressed my concerns by this point, and they aren't the type to want to scare me. Neither are my parents. The only other family member I have in the US are my dad's parents, who don't speak English well and have never owned a computer. They immigrated here, and wouldn't know people in so many states. Aside from my parents and my brother, who find it strange as well, I have no other family. I still get the cards every year, always the same, except for one Valentine's Day a few years ago. I received a stuffed teddy bear and a big chocolate heart along with the card. Needless to say, I did not eat the chocolate, and I searched that fucking bear, half convinced there could be a hidden camera. After that year, I just started receiving the cards again. In any case, as a child, it was sort of exciting and mysterious, like a secret admirer. Now it's just unnerving. I have racked my brain for years trying to figure out who it could possibly be, and I've come up empty-handed. It still makes me feel uneasy, but if this person wanted to hurt me, I think they would have done it by now. I never felt threatened by them, so I don't think there's much I can do about it. The main thing I want to know is why. What is the point? And who? I may never find out. My messed up Valentine's Day. When I was in high school, I lived in a really small town in Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone was either related to each other or hated each other. I had no family there, so yeah. I did have a pretty blonde girlfriend, and was pretty hated for that too. Nothing major, just petty harassment, occasional fights, but it had been escalating. So that's why on Valentine's Day, my girlfriend and I decided to skip the school dance and just stay in and watch a movie at her house, while her parents were out of town. Just better to avoid trouble. We borrowed her dad's car, a little Honda hatchback, and went into town. We stopped at the video store for a movie and went to the Dairy Queen for some ice cream, and then headed home. Now, she lives in the complete boonies out in the middle of the woods along a lonely road with no streetlights. We're chatting, eating our blizzards when all of a sudden a car comes up behind us. No big deal. What was a very big deal was that when the headlights flooded the interior of our car, I saw two hands on the back seat and a head coming from the hatchback part of the car. As soon as the lights hit, the head and hands retreated back down. A solid chill ran through the entire length of my body. I slowly reached down and pulled out of my pocket a pocket knife, the only thing I had. She saw me and asked what was wrong. Loudly I said, "Nothing. I just have to stop at my friend's house real quick." She knew that was bullshit. I didn't have any friends. I pulled over at the next house that came up and jumped out of the car, yelling at her to jump out too. She jumped out in total confusion. I flipped the driver's seat forward and lunged into the back seat in full manic mode. He popped up like a little jack-in-the-box with empty hands waving, "Hey, hey, 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 what y'all doing up tonight?" It was some weird kid from our high school who we never in our entire lives spoken to before. Ever. I asked, "What the holy fuck are you doing in our car?" His reply was, "I thought you guys were going to the school dance and I was just hitching a ride, you know?" We sat there staring at him with our mouths open, wondering what to do. He tried to act real cool, and obviously we were in the middle of nowhere, in some random person's driveway, so whatever he was planning was forgotten. We eventually ended up driving him to the dance and dropping him off. The whole time he was telling us to come inside with him. Yeah, no thanks. We dropped his ass off and noped out of there as soon as we could. As soon as he got out of our car, my girlfriend started crying and shaking. She was so freaked out. I have no idea what he was trying to do when the lights caught him crawling out of the hatchback. I fucking hated that high school. My dad was followed by a murderer. My dad used to tell me this story, although I didn't know the grisly details until I was older. It's one of those listen to your gut lessons. The setting is small town Indiana, early to mid 1970s. My dad is in middle school to early high school aged. His house was about 6 or 7 blocks from the school, so when the weather was nice, he would walk home from school. One day, on his walk home, he noticed a guy in a van driving by him slowly. It was a bit strange, but he thought nothing of it. Then, it happened again and again. Eventually, the guy driving the van started yelling things at him, usually asking him to buy drugs. This is when my dad recognized the guy as Roger. Roger was about 9 years older than my dad, but my dad was friends with one of Roger's relatives, so he knew who he was. Anyways, the cycle of Roger following my dad for blocks as he walked home and asking him to buy drugs continued for who knows how long. My dad always got this gut feeling that something was deeply off about Roger. He was so afraid that when Roger yelled, he wouldn't even respond. He just stared at the ground until he reached his house. The walks must have seemed like forever for my dad. My dad was one of those kids who seemed to grow a foot taller over one summer, so he isn't sure if Roger stopped because my dad was more physically intimidating, or if he had just moved on. But either way, he was glad when the interaction stopped. Fast forward to Valentines Day 1977. In a different town, still small and remote, a woman is at home with her son and 3 stepsons. Roger and 3 other men break into her home with shotguns and force her and her boys to lie face down on the floor. Roger and the gang threaten and taunt them for hours before shooting them one by one. One of the shots partially blew off the wig that the mother was wearing. Roger thought her skull was blown off, and assuming she was dead, stopped shooting her. She survived, later describing hearing a horrible noise as she was lying there, and realized that she was hearing the blood drain from her son and stepsons. She described it as almost like a waterfall. Roger and his gang got away with a whopping $40, but it was never about the robbery. It was about the thrill of taking human lives. The mother eventually identified Roger and the 3 other men as the perpetrators, with Roger being the ringleader. Indiana didn't have a death penalty at the time, so each man was sentenced to multiple life sentences. Roger recently died in prison. I know that it's unlikely that my dad would have been murdered by Roger had he got into the van or bought drugs from him, but the fact that he was so close so often to someone who was capable of doing something like that is unsettling. I had a stalker. Creepy Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day this year was very disturbing. We attended this protest against church closings. So I'm just standing there with my parents and the usual people, and this creeper comes along. I volunteered with nuns, and he's the nephew of one of those sisters who happens to be a favorite of mine. So the service started, and when we started to sing, I didn't have the papers with the lyrics, so he shared his with mine. After we got done singing, I walked away to get away from him, and he followed me. He walked behind me and whispered in my ear, "I have a Valentine for you. You look very beautiful today." I'm in my 20s and this guy is 50. At this point, I felt fear creeping up on me. So I told my parents to hurry up, and I grabbed the keys from my dad and ran to the car. I could hear him honking loudly. Unfortunately, my parents took their good old time getting to the car, and he was running right behind them. I was just there sitting there, and once my parents were in the car, he showed up next to my door. He had this bag and pulled out this champagne bottle made from chocolate. Then he had a blank envelope and wrote something on it and gave it to me. Alright, well, I had the bag and the envelope and we drove off. I looked inside the bag and in it was the bottle, a bag of gummy bears and a hat that said "sexy girl" on it. At this point, I was shaking. On the envelope, it said "darling" and my name. I was terrified. I was scared to go back to the protest because every time I would see him there. Then my father confronted him and told him to back off and to leave me the hell alone. So months passed by and there was no sign of him. But then last week when I was at church with my mother, he was there. I didn't notice him at first because he was sitting behind us on the other side of the church observing. Then after I came back from the communion, there was a bag there. Turns out I was in line. He came to our pew and put it there and he left the church. In the bag was a box of heart-shaped chocolates. I was freaking out. After the mass, we decided to give them to the priest, and even he thought it was creepy. We were driving home and noticed his van by the local pharmacy and saw him walking with a card in his hand. Then we quickly drove past. Any advice on what I should do if I see this creeper again? My story of a secret admirer. Let me start with this disclaimer. I was hesitant to post this because this probably isn't really all that spooky in comparison to the other stuff that makes its way here. But after keeping myself up all night, I decided to share it. Enjoy. I am a female, and I was kind of a dweeb in middle school. I was the quiet girl, a label that kind of followed me all the way through my grade school, and eventually would through the former half of high school. I was picked on for it to some degree, but ultimately people ignored me, which I decided was preferable to being harassed every day. I was not very into girly things, having a preference for video games and drawing, which kept my pool of like-minded friends pretty trimmed down. I was too shy to approach any boys in pursuit of friendship or whatever else, so I mostly stuck with a pair of chicks who despite going out of their ways and becoming homecoming queens in the following years, really enjoyed my awkward and quirky company at the time. I believed I was in 8th grade, and Valentine's Day rolled around. Being an insufferable nerd, I initially didn't give it much thought. Our school did the silly thing in which you could, in the days before Valentine's Day, order carnations and have them delivered to other students, anonymously or otherwise. Needless to say, I wasn't expecting one. But in first period that day, which happened to be gym class, I was sitting down for roll call and the flower delivery person came in with their rounds. To my surprise, my name was called. I was so floored that at first I didn't speak up, assuming I heard the name wrong or something. But sure enough, after a few pointing fingers from the rest of my class, I was the confused but flattered recipient of a nice peach-colored carnation. I hadn't the slightest who the sender was, of course, and by lunchtime I was itching to see if either one of my gossipy know-everything girlfriends had any leads. They too were surprised to see me sit down with my lunch, sporting a carnation, though not in an insulting way, and were very keen on getting to the bottom of it. They were thrilled to think there might be some shy boy with an interest in me, and after the initial shock, I was too. They did a bunch of asking around that lunch period, and by the end of lunch, I had a potential candidate. His name was Josh. I didn't know him very well, but I had a couple classes with him, namely art. I believe he was also in my math class. He too was a very quiet, lonesome, nerdy type, and I knew he was into video games, if only from the art project we were doing at the time. He made something with a Super Smash Bros. Theme, and I thought that was pretty fucking cool. He had glasses, long curly blonde hair that he kept in a ponytail, and wore all black pretty regularly. Immediately, my mind wandered through the prospect of having him as a boyfriend, going home with him after school to play video games, and draw and whatever else two dorks would find interesting. My friends had concluded it was him after talking to some guys who knew him, claiming that he said he bought a peach carnation anonymously for somebody, though they didn't know who. It seemed sufficient information, so we all got in our heads that he was the culprit. The following few days, I expected him to eventually come forward. I watched him fondly from a distance in my art class, though not obsessively, and certainly never had the balls to go ask him about the flower. What would I ask anyways? What if my friends and I were wrong in our detective work? That'd be pretty awkward. And being the socially anxious creature I was, not even the prospect of having my first boyfriend could prod me towards something so potentially devastating. So I waited, with much patience and empathy for my fellow socially awkward penguin. Weeks passed, and I was never approached. Despite how exciting it originally felt, it drifted to the back of my mind, and I quietly accepted that we were probably wrong. Either way, it seemed unlikely that my Valentine was ever going to fess up, whoever he was. I eventually had better things to think about, just about forgetting about the incidents altogether. Fast forward a few weeks, and I walk into a circle of the popular kids, and one of my classes whispering about something. My seat being where it was, I could hear everything that was being said. They seemed pretty disturbed, and were talking about some quiet guy who had left notes in one of the classes they had found. The notes were essentially weird, cryptic poems entailing his desire and plans to shoot up the school and then kill himself. I never personally saw the notes, but it was very concerning, and as the conversation went on, it was undeniably clear who they were referring to. So when they tried to remember his name with repeated failures, I finally spoke up. "Josh?" I attempted timidly, which was met by several surprised looks, and finally, yeah, Josh, That's his name. I felt sick and wanted to cry. I don't remember all the details of how things proceeded from there, but eventually, I was convinced that there was no one that knew about this or had any sort of authority about it. I don't believe I told any other students about what I'd heard, hesitant to start some stupid rumor, but I did tell the school counselor and my parents because I was genuinely scared for my safety. Afterwards, I never heard any follow-up about the whole ordeal, and I never saw Josh again in my life. I assume he was expelled. Frustratingly, none of the details were ever solidly confirmed, but the possibilities still haunt me to this day. Perhaps it's stupid and overly empathetic of me, but I sometimes wonder if his failed attempt to finally make a connection with someone on Valentine's Day was the final straw for him, driving him to thoughts of homicide and suicide. I hardly feel guilty about it, but it's just another aspect of the whole ordeal that makes me absolutely nauseated to think about